Hello. I want to talk today about the ball in the box analogy. Now, this is a video that I did on YouTube a couple of years ago, but it is one of my most watched videos ever. So I wanted to revisit it today because I feel that it's super important. So let's get into it. So what the ball in the box analogy is, it's an anxiety, trauma, grief counselling type of process. And basically what it is it's a really easy diagram to show you, it's a really easy analogy to show you why you can be fine in your grief, in your trauma, in your anxiety, in day-to-day life. You can be fine, and then all of a sudden you have a hit of anxiety or grief or trauma, and it all comes flooding back and it literally floors you. So to tell you a story about this, the first time I did this particular video was an anniversary of the Christchurch earthquakes. So for those of you that don't know me, I lived through the Christchurch earthquakes in 2011, and it was one of the hardest times of my entire life. There was multiple people died, multiple buildings fell down. We lived without power, we lived without water, we lived without a proper toilet for a good couple of months after that, because all of the sewerage and the pipes and all of the things, the electricity, all of the stuff you take for granted underneath the ground and was so broken that we lived with almost yes, we had a house, but we were actually living through aftershocks, and you never knew when one was going to strike. And foolishly, actually, being from the UK, I wasn't used to earthquakes. It wasn't something I'd ever grown up being aware of, because you don't get them in the UK. We don't live on a fault line. Like, New Zealand is literally built on a fault line. Christchurch, though, was not meant to be the dangerous place. It was meant to be the safer option. When we chose to live here, we love Wellington, right? We adore Wellington, but we chose to live in Christchurch because it was meant to be where there was not going to be so many, threats of this sort of happening. So yeah, it was a bit of a shock to the system, and I didn't know how to cope with it. And I foolishly thought that once the big quake was over in September the 4th was the first one, which kind of set off the chain of everything that followed. Once that one happened, I foolishly thought we were good, it was over, it was all fine, that's that, I've done it, we've all survived, woohoo, let's just get on with life. It didn't happen like that. And we had aftershock after aftershock after aftershock after aftershock, and they got worse and they were powerful, and some of them, like the one in February, was actually worse and did much more damage than the initial first one, which was a 7.2, I think. And so we lived through all of that, and it's very heightened, and you're having a shot of adrenaline every time there's an aftershock. Your cortisol goes through the roof every time there's an aftershock, and it's like you're in that kind of adrenal fatigue type scenario if you're a woman, where you're getting hit after hit after hit. And we were constantly living in this state of heightened anxiety, just kind of every time a truck went past and you'd hear that rumble, it was like, is this going to be another one? Are we going to have another one? But over time, over a matter of weeks, months, years for some people, that did lessen. And so you'd start to live in this kind of semi-normality again. Your life gets back to normal. You don't forget, but you're not in that heightened awareness anymore. And so you can be okay, and then suddenly, just from somewhere, completely out of nowhere, bam, you get this hit of massive adrenaline again, and you're like, why on earth did that send me into that place? And I mean, grief is the same thing. Like, I lost both my parents now. I've actually lost 3 parents. I lost my mum when I was 7, my stepmom and my stepdad within a couple of years of each other. And some normal life goes on, right? You lose people in your life and life goes on and everything's okay. And then suddenly out of nowhere you get this hit of grief and you're like, it floors you completely, and you have no idea where it comes from because you're living okay. You are, time heals, as they say, but something can happen, something can remind you. You can just wake up and bam, you're back in that place. We're dealing with that grief, dealing with that trauma, and it's really hard to understand why that happens. And so this is a really easy analogy. The ball in the box analogy is a really easy way of showing you in pictures why it happens. So something happens in your life, right? And I'm not a drawer, so please excuse my drawing. Something happens in your life and it's hugely fresh in your mind. It's there, it's just happened, it's in the forefront of your mind and you are hyper aware of it. And this drawing here is why, because your brain, you're kind of, you're here, your mind is this, and this is your grief, right? And so it's so close to all of the edges, and so it hits all of the time. It doesn't take a lot for this to hit your pain and your grief threshold, and you're in that place, and it's high anxiety and high sadness and all of that stuff that comes with anxiety and trauma. And then over time, the grief, which is this big ball here, it lessens and lessens and lessens, and it becomes little, like this one here. And so it's tiny because life's moved on. You're learning to live with it. You never forget, but you learn to live with it because that's what time does, and that's what life's like. You learn to live with the consequences of things that have happened in your life. But every now and again, it bounces around and it hits the pain point. It hits the pain points of your mind. So here, it's going to hit every single time because the ball's massive. Over time, it shrinks. And then when it hits, it's going to be much fewer. But when it hits, it still impacts you. And that is how grief and trauma and anxiety works. It shrinks. It starts off as this big ball in your mind and in your body and in your soul, and time heals and it shrinks and it shrinks and it shrinks. But every now and again, something will throw you back in to that place and it hits the pain wall again. And that is why you can be okay. You can be okay, and then occasionally you get this real shot of, I'm back in that place again and I'm floored by it. Because no matter how small that grief ball gets, when it hits just as hard as it did when it was fresh and it was real and it was right in the forefront of your mind. So that is why you can get thrown into these places that you don't want to go. You can be fine, and then suddenly, whoa, you're right back there again. And the biggest analogy I can give you from my life for this is that in those earthquakes, on every anniversary after it happened in Christchurch, we used to put flowers in the top of road cones to symbolise the people that had died and to symbolise the new blooming of the city, the new rebuild. And spring and flowers is bloom and it's rebuild and it's a new season. And so in the road cones that were everywhere after the earthquakes, people would put flowers in the top, and it became a symbol. It became a symbol of the anniversary, and it became a symbol of what we lived through and the people that died. And so we would go on with our lives, and it would be an anniversary, and suddenly you'd see a road cone with a flower in, and boom, you're right back there again, because that symbol reminds you of what you lived through and what it was like, and the pain, and the ball hits your pain points and you're thrown right back in there again. A lorry will go past my house and suddenly, bam, I'm right back there again, because that rumble noise reminds me of quakes. I will hear an ambulance siren and suddenly, whoa, I'm right back there again, because everywhere we were throughout that day and the days that followed. We kept hearing ambulance sirens and police and fire engines, and that just takes you straight back and it hits your pain point and you're there again. So I hope that's been helpful. You know, your grief starts off like this and it gets to be tiny once you learn to live with it. You'll never forget it, and every now and again it will hit your pain point, and every now and again it will come back and it will throw you right back into that place. But just know that it's normal. It's totally normal. It happens to everybody that has been through something in life that has knocked the stuffing out of them. It's a totally normal process, and it will pass. You just need to let it in, ride it out again. Like I say, you know, you have to ride the waves. I say this so many times. Let it come, let it peak, and let it flow out again, and you will be okay. I hope that's been helpful. I'll see you again next week. Bye.